When Princess Anne emerged, it began with a carefully timed silence inside Windsor's private corridors, one so deliberate that even seasoned royal aides refused to speak above a whisper. When Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie abruptly altered the rules surrounding children's public appearances, palace insiders immediately sensed something deeper unfolding behind the scenes. The shift was subtle at first, but within days, royal watchers realized this was no ordinary protocol adjustment. It was the beginning of a coordinated strategy that could redefine the monarchy's future heirs forever. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie occupied a strange position inside the monarchy. Never the loudest voices, never the most photographed figures. But according to longtime palace observers, that quietness was precisely what made them influential behind closed doors. While public attention remained fixed on King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine, Edward and Sophie were allegedly holding a series of low-profile discussions concerning one issue that had begun alarming senior royals more than and almost anything else: the growing pressure being placed on royal children in the modern media age. Reports suggest those meetings intensified in recent months as scrutiny surrounding Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis reached levels some insiders described as deeply concerning. At first, the changes appeared minor: fewer unscheduled appearances, more tightly controlled walkabouts, stricter press positioning during family events. But royal correspondents quickly noticed that something unusual was taking shape behind palace walls. Sources close to royal operations claimed aides had received fresh instructions limiting spontaneous access to younger royals during public engagements. Even photographers with long-standing royal credentials reportedly encountered restrictions that had not existed before. The atmosphere, according to several palace insiders, suddenly became tense, cautious, almost defensive, and that alone raised questions. Because historically, the monarchy rarely moves without reason. What truly unsettled royal watchers, however, was the timing. Catherine and Prince William were allegedly informed about the strategy before any public adjustments became visible, suggesting this was not simply Edward and Sophie acting independently. Various interpretations of the situation describe a coordinated effort among senior royals to shield the next generation from pressures they believe are becoming psychologically dangerous. And behind those concerns was an unmistakable shadow hanging over every discussion: the memory of Princess Diana. Those comparisons began quietly but soon spread through royal commentary circles with remarkable speed. Veteran journalists referenced William's own childhood experiences with relentless press intrusion. Others pointed to Harry's repeated claims about growing up inside what he once described as an emotional fishbowl. Palace administrative whispers suggested senior royals feared social media had transformed royal exposure into something even harsher than the tabloid era Diana endured during the 1990s. Back then, cameras followed royals relentlessly. Now, according to insiders, scrutiny never truly stops. Every expression, every gesture, every childhood moment can become global debate within seconds. And it was Princess Charlotte's growing visibility that reportedly intensified private concerns the most. Palace observers noticed increasing public fascination surrounding her confidence, her resemblance to Queen Elizabeth II, even her body language during official appearances. What many viewed as harmless admiration allegedly triggered a deeper anxiety within royal circles. Some insiders feared Charlotte was beginning to experience the same dangerous blend of adoration and pressure that once surrounded Diana herself. That fear, according to reports, became impossible for Edward and Sophie to ignore. What emerged from those discussions was said to be the early framework of a larger future monarchy protection plan, one designed not simply to reduce exposure, but to fundamentally rethink how royal children are introduced to public life altogether. And while palace officials avoided publicly acknowledging any dramatic shift, the silence itself became impossible to ignore. Because inside the House of Windsor, silence has always been the clearest signal that something serious is unfolding behind the scenes. But the decision was never simply about privacy. It was about preventing history from repeating itself inside the House of Windsor. Long before Prince George, Charlotte, and Louis, because global symbols of the monarchy's future, another young royal stood beneath the relentless glare of cameras: Princess Diana. And according to various royal commentators, the trauma of that era never truly left the institution. Now, decades later, Edward and Sophie appear determined to ensure the next generation never experiences the same fate. The fear surrounding royal exposure did not emerge overnight. It was built slowly, painfully, through decades of public obsession and private damage that many inside the House of Windsor reportedly still struggle to discuss openly. Princess Diana's life changed the monarchy forever, not simply because of her popularity, but because of what that popularity revealed about the dangerous relationship between royalty, fame, and emotional survival. Palace insiders have long whispered that senior royals watched helplessly as Diana became trapped between institutional duty and global celebrity, with Prince William and Prince Harry absorbing the consequences in full public view while still children. That memory, according to several royal commentators, continues haunting the monarchy more deeply than the public realizes. For Prince William especially, those years allegedly left scars that never fully disappeared. Royal experts frequently point to the extraordinary pressure he faced as a young boy forced to navigate grief, media scrutiny, and public expectations simultaneously. The images may have become historical symbols to the world, but within palace circles, they reportedly remain painful reminders of what happens when royal childhood becomes public spectacle. And now, with George, Charlotte, and Louis growing older under an even more relentless digital spotlight, insiders claim William has become increasingly determined not to allow history to repeat itself. That determination appears to align closely with the quiet philosophy Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie have reportedly embraced for years. Unlike other senior royals, Edward and Sophie built much of their family life away from constant headlines, carefully protecting Lady Louise and James, Earl of Wessex, from excessive public exposure during their formative years. Palace observers often describe Sophie as one of the monarchy's fiercest defenders of family privacy, someone deeply aware of how brutal royal life can become when personal boundaries disappear entirely. Why? Anaya, the other royal figures captured media attention through spectacle and controversy. Sophie allegedly focused on something far less visible but increasingly important inside palace strategy: emotional stability. And then there is Edward himself, frequently described by royal insiders as the quiet architect of stability. Never dramatic, never attention-seeking, yet consistently trusted within the institution during moments of turbulence. Reports suggest Edward's influence has grown significantly in recent years precisely because of his calm, measured approach to royal duty. While louder personalities often dominate headlines, Edward's strength allegedly lies in understanding how the monarchy survives long-term crises. And according to sources familiar with recent palace discussions, he believes the future of the crown may depend on protecting younger royals from becoming consumed by the modern media machine before they are emotionally prepared to handle it. That concern has reportedly intensified as public appearances themselves become more carefully managed institutional moments rather than spontaneous family interactions. Palace aides are said to increasingly analyze how young royals are photographed, discussed online, and emotionally perceived by the public. What once would have been dismissed as harmless fascination now carries heavier implications in an era dominated by social media commentary, viral speculation, and constant surveillance disguised as entertainment. Some insiders reportedly fear the pressure facing George, Charlotte, and Louis may ultimately surpass what William and Harry endured during the 1990s, because today's scrutiny follows royal children every hour of every day, without pause or escape. Behind closed doors, reports suggest intense internal debates have emerged over how accessible the monarchy should remain while still protecting the emotional well-being of its youngest members. Some palace traditionalists allegedly argue visibility is essential for maintaining public loyalty. Others warn the institution risks sacrificing another generation to satisfy endless public demand. That tension now sits at the center of a growing royal dilemma, because while the monarchy depends on public connection to survive, it also understands the devastating human cost that visibility can carry when left unchecked. Yet behind the careful language of modern parenting was a deeper palace calculation, one involving succession, image control, and the survival of the crown itself. What appeared to the public as a minor scheduling adjustment was reportedly part of something far more calculated. Sources close to royal administrative circles claim Prince Edward and Sophie had been quietly developing a coordinated framework for months, one designed to tightly control when, where, and how royal children would be seen in public. As palace debates over privacy and succession intensified behind closed doors, What many initially dismissed as cautious parenting slowly began revealing the shape of something far more strategic. According to royal insiders, Edward and Sophie were no longer simply offering advice to William and Catherine, they were allegedly helping construct an entirely new operational approach for the monarchy's younger generation. Quietly, methodically, and without public announcement, a system was beginning to emerge inside palace structures that some aides reportedly described as an appearance review framework. And while officials refused to publicly acknowledge its existence, royal watchers soon noticed unmistakable changes. An eye unfolding across the institution. Events involving Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis reportedly started undergoing far stricter internal evaluations before approval. Public walkabouts once viewed as harmless opportunities for connections suddenly became subjects of deeper discussion involving security teams, communications staff, and senior household advisors. Sources familiar with palace operations claim that appearances involving the whales are often used as a way to distract from the real issue. Children increasingly required higher-level authorization than in previous years, particularly after growing concerns surrounding invasive online commentary and aggressive photography tactics. To outsiders, the adjustments appeared subtle. But inside royal circles, insiders allegedly understood immediately that the institution's priorities were shifting. One of the most noticeable changes involved spontaneity, or rather, the disappearance of it. Royal aides reportedly became far less willing to allow unplanned interactions involving younger royals, especially in crowded public environments where emotional moments could instantly become global headlines. Those close to the palace claimed this was not about arrogance or distance, but about control, absolute control. Every appearance, every photograph, every brief interaction increasingly carried long-term implications in an era where even a child's facial expression could trigger days of international speculation. And according to some insiders, Edward understood that danger earlier than most. That understanding is reportedly why his influence inside these discussions became so significant. Royal commentators often describe Edward as someone obsessed with institutional longevity rather than short-term popularity. While other members of the family navigate public approval through charisma and visibility, Edward allegedly approaches monarchy like a fragile constitutional structure that must be protected carefully over decades, not news cycles. Insiders claim he strongly favors long-term institutional thinking, particularly when it comes to safeguarding future heirs from emotional exhaustion before they fully understand the burden of royal life. But perhaps the most intriguing figure inside this evolving strategy was Sophie herself. Palace staff reportedly viewed her role as both understated and deeply influential. Calm in public, discipline. Maya Sadai in private, Sophie allegedly became one of the strongest voices advocating for tighter emotional boundaries around royal children. Various interpretations of recent palace decisions describe her influence as quiet but deeply strategic, especially regarding media access and family scheduling. Unlike more confrontational royal figures, Sophie reportedly operates through consensus, preparation, and relentless behind-the-scenes coordination. And according to sources close to the institution, that approach earned growing trust from both William and Catherine during an increasingly uncertain period for the monarchy. At the same time, security concerns reportedly escalated to levels the public rarely sees. Royal insiders claim palace officials became alarmed not only by physical threats, but by the psychological consequences of non-stop digital exposure. Social media analysis teams allegedly began monitoring online commentary involving royal children more closely, particularly after several viral moments surrounding Princess Charlotte generated overwhelming global attention. Some palace aides reportedly feared the line between admiration and intrusion was beginning to disappear entirely. That fear pushed discussions toward more aggressive protective measures, including comparisons to Scandinavian royal models, where younger heirs maintained far stricter public boundaries during childhood. And yet, as the strategy slowly became more visible through reduced appearances, tighter coordination between Kensington Palace and Edinburgh offices, and increasingly controlled family engagements, another question quietly began spreading through royal circles. Because whenever the monarchy changes its behavior this dramatically, insiders know there is always a deeper reason beneath the surface. But as the strategy became more visible, questions began spreading through royal circles. Who exactly was this new approach meant to protect and from whom? For years, Catherine and William walked a delicate line between public duty and family protection. But insiders now suggest Edward and Sophie's approach finally gave the Wales family something they had quietly sought for. Years of blueprint for shielding their children without appearing disconnected from the public they are destined to serve. Behind the carefully measured smiles and disciplined public appearances, Prince William and Catherine, Marianne were reportedly facing a growing internal struggle that few outside palace walls fully understood. On one side stood the immense weight of royal expectation, an institution built upon visibility, accessibility, and symbolism. On the other stood something far more personal and far more fragile, the emotional well-being of three young children growing up under levels of scrutiny unlike anything previous generations experienced. According to royal insiders, that conflict had been building quietly for years, long before the recent changes surrounding royal appearances became visible to the public. And as pressure intensified around George, Charlotte, and Louis, William allegedly became increasingly convinced that the monarchy could not continue operating under old assumptions. Those close to the Prince and Princess of Wales claim William's protectiveness toward his children has deepened significantly in recent years, particularly as Prince George moves closer to the realities of future kingship. Palace commentators frequently note that George's childhood carries a unique burden within the royal family. Unlike most children, his future has already been decided. Every public moment Masayan emerged, every expression, every interaction is examined through the lens of destiny. And according to sources familiar with William's thinking, that reality has forced him to confront painful memories from his own childhood in ways he never expected. Because while the world saw Diana's sons as symbols of national emotion, William reportedly remembers something very different: confusion, pressure, and a constant sense of exposure that never truly disappeared. Catherine, meanwhile, is said to have approached the issue with a quieter but equally determined philosophy. Royal insiders often describe her preference as measured visibility, a strategy designed to maintain public connection without allowing royal childhood to become permanent spectacle. Unlike previous generations of royal parenting, which often relied heavily on institutional tradition, Catherine reportedly favors emotional balance and carefully controlled exposure. Those close to palace operations suggest she strongly believes children should experience as much normalcy as possible, despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding their lives. And according to multiple reports, Edward and Sophie's evolving framework finally got William and Catherine a structure capable of supporting that vision without appearing detached from royal duty. That alignment reportedly created what royal commentators now describe as a growing united front among senior working royals. While public attention often focuses on dramatic personalities and visible tensions, insiders claim a quieter alliance has formed beneath the surface involving Edward, Sophie, William, and Catherine, one centered around the long-term protection of the monarchy's youngest generation. Their approach allegedly prioritizes emotional resilience over constant visibility, a philosophy that marks a significant cultural shift inside the institution itself. Because for decades, the monarchy survived by ensuring the public always had access to its future heirs. Now, according to insiders, some senior royals are beginning to question whether too much access may ultimately damage those heirs before they are prepared to carry the burden of the crown. Even palace security procedures reportedly began changing as those concerns intensified. Sources claim aides quietly adjusted school-related operations involving George, Charlotte, and Louis, particularly regarding transportation routes, photography risks, and unsanctioned public exposure. Public appearances involving the children also became noticeably more curated, with royal staff allegedly placing greater emphasis on emotional comfort and controlled engagement rather than lengthy, unpredictable interactions. And nowhere was that tension more visible than around Princess Charlotte herself. Charlotte's growing popularity reportedly became both a remarkable asset for the monarchy and an unexpected source of concern within palace circles. Her confidence, composure, and resemblance to Queen Elizabeth II turned her into a public favorite almost effortlessly. But insiders suggest that very popularity also triggered fears about overexposure at an increasingly young age. William, according to various royal commentators, became deeply aware of how quickly admiration can evolve into obsession within royal culture. And that awareness allegedly strengthened his determination to avoid repeating the same devastating mistakes that once consumed Diana's world and permanently altered his own childhood forever. However, not everyone inside royal circles welcomed the shift, and resistance soon began emergent. unexpected corners of the institution. Behind the polished palace statements and carefully staged appearances, frustration was reportedly building. Some insiders allegedly feared the monarchy risked becoming too distant from the public, while others argued Edward and Sophie's strategy was the only way to preserve the emotional stability of the next generation of royals. As the new approach surrounding royal children became more visible, tensions inside palace circles reportedly began intensifying in ways the public could not immediately see. What had started as a quiet effort to protect George, Charlotte, and Louis was now evolving into a much larger debate about the monarchy's future identity itself. According to royal insiders, divisions quietly emerged between those who believed the crown must remain constantly accessible to survive, and those who feared unrestricted visibility was slowly becoming destructive. And beneath that disagreement sat an uncomfortable truth many within the institution allegedly struggled to confront. The royal family no longer operates in the world it once understood. For generations, public visibility was considered one of the monarchy's greatest strengths. Walkabouts, school photographs, balcony appearances, carefully timed family moments, these traditions reinforced emotional connection between the crown and the public. Senior palace aides reportedly worried that reducing those moments too aggressively could weaken the monarchy's image at a time when public trust in institutions across Britain was already under pressure. Some insiders allegedly feared younger generations might eventually see the royal family as distant, guarded, and emotionally inaccessible if appearances involving the Wales children became too tightly controlled. Those concerns reportedly fueled growing unease among communications teams tasked with balancing popularity against protection. At the same time, media insiders began openly speculating about deeper tensions surrounding royal branding and long-term strategy. Commentators questioned whether the monarchy could realistically maintain its relevance while limiting access to the very heirs expected to carry its future. Others argued the institution had become trapped in an impossible contradiction desperately, needing public affection while simultaneously fearing the consequences of public obsession. That contradiction reportedly sparked difficult private conversations inside palace operations, particularly as online reactions surrounding George and Charlotte grew increasingly intense with every appearance they made. Yet despite the criticism, sources close to the situation claim Prince Edward remained remarkably unwavering. Royal insiders often described him as someone resistant to emotional panic or media pressure, particularly during institutional disputes. While debates reportedly intensified around him, Edward allegedly continued insisting that short-term popularity could never come at the expense of long-term emotional stability for future heirs. According to those familiar with palace discussions, he viewed the current moment as a turning point for the monarchy itself. Not dramatic, not explosive, but deeply consequential. Because once a royal child loses the ability to grow privately, insiders claim Edward believes the damage can rarely be undone. Sophie's role inside those discussions reportedly became even more direct. Various interpretations of private palace meetings describe her repeatedly advocating for what some aides summarized as a children-first institution. Sophie, that position allegedly unsettled certain traditionalists within royal circles who believed duty to the crown must always remain the primary priority. But Sophie, according to insiders, viewed emotional protection as essential to preserving the monarchy long-term. Reports suggest she privately warned that failing to adapt to the realities of modern scrutiny could eventually create another generation of emotionally exhausted royals struggling beneath unbearable public pressure. And within palace walls, the echoes of Diana and Harry reportedly made those warnings impossible to dismiss entirely. Comparisons to European monarchies soon entered the debate as well. Royal commentators pointed to Scandinavian royal households, where younger heirs often experience far stricter privacy protections and significantly fewer public obligations during childhood. Supporters of Edward and Sophie's strategy allegedly argued Britain's monarchy had fallen, dangerously behind in recognizing how aggressively digital culture now targets royal families. Critics, however, warned that adopting such models risked weakening the uniquely emotional bond between the British public and the crow. And as those disagreements spread beyond palace walls, public reaction became increasingly divided online. Some praised William and Catherine for attempting to protect their children from the relentless machinery of modern fame. Others accused the monarchy of becoming overly controlled and disconnected from ordinary people whose support ultimately sustains the institution itself. But while the public argued over appearances, access, and tradition, palace insiders reportedly noticed something far more significant happening quietly, behind the scenes, because Edward and Sophie were no longer standing alone in this strategy. But the real significance of the strategy only became clear when palace observers noticed who was quietly standing behind Edward and Sophie all along. As King Charles continues navigating an increasingly fragile chapter of his reign, a quieter alliance appears to be forming beneath the surface of the monarchy. And according to multiple royal commentators, Prince Edward and Sophie may now occupy an unexpected role inside the institution, not merely supportive relatives, but guardians of the monarchy's youngest future. For much of modern royal history, Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie existed at the edges of public fascination. They were rarely the center of headlines, rarely associated with palace drama, and almost never treated as defining figures within the institution's future direction. Yet insiders now suggest that very absence from controversy may have become their greatest strength during one of the monarchy's most uncertain periods in decades. As King Charles faces mounting pressures surrounding health, succession, and institutional stability, palace observers claim Edward and Sophie have quietly emerged as two of the most trusted and stabilizing figures inside the royal family itself. And what once appeared to be quiet irrelevance is now increasingly viewed as deliberate steadiness. According to those familiar with palace operations, senior royals have become acutely aware that the monarchy is entering a dangerous generational transition. King Charles carries the burden of maintaining continuity during a deeply fragile period, while Prince William prepares for responsibilities that are rapidly moving closer with each passing year. But beneath those constitutional realities lies another concern, one far more emotional and deeply personal. Now, the future of the monarchy no longer depends only on crowns, ceremonies, and succession laws. It depends on whether the next generation of royal children can survive the extraordinary pressure surrounding them without being emotionally broken by it. And insiders claim Edward and Sophie understand that danger more clearly than almost anyone else inside the institution. Royal commentators increasingly describe them as protectors of continuity, figures tasked not with commanding attention, but with preserving stability, while others carry the public burden of monarchy. Sophie's calm public image reportedly became especially valuable during a time when audiences appear exhausted by scandal, division, and emotional volatility within royal life. Polling discussions among royal analysts frequently note growing public trust in Sophie precisely because she projects restraint rather than spectacle. In an era dominated by viral controversy and endless public dissection, that quiet composure reportedly became a source of reassurance both inside and outside palace walls. Edward's role, meanwhile, appears rooted in something equally significant: consistency. While other royal figures became mass and emerged symbols of conflict, transition, or institutional upheaval, Edward allegedly maintained steady loyalty to the monarchy's long-term survival. Palace insiders often suggest he approaches royal duty less as performance and more as preservation. That philosophy reportedly aligns closely with King Charles himself, who, according to various interpretations of palace discussions, has become increasingly supportive of reducing emotional pressure on George, Charlotte, and Louis. Though Charles remains deeply aware of the monarchy's need for public connection, insiders claim he also understands the devastating consequences of excessive exposure better than many realize. After all, he witnessed firsthand what relentless public fascination ultimately did to Diana, to William, and eventually to Harry. That awareness appears to be reshaping the monarchy's priorities in subtle but profound ways. Sources close to palace circles suggest senior royals are gradually shifting focus away from constant media spectacle and towards safeguarding emotional well-being for younger heirs. George, Charlotte, and Louis are no longer viewed merely as charming public figures designed to strengthen royal popularity. Increasingly, they are being treated as symbols of institutional survival itself. Their stability matters because the monarchy's future stability depends upon it. And according to insiders, that realization has fundamentally altered conversations happening behind palace walls. Rather than chasing short-term approval through endless visibility, the institution now appears more focused on longevity, on ensuring future heirs reach adulthood emotionally prepared for the immense responsibilities waiting ahead. That shift reportedly reflects a growing understanding that the monarchy cannot, survive modern media culture by operating according to 20th century expectations. Social media, non-stop commentary, invasive speculation, and global scrutiny have transformed royal life into something far harsher than previous generations experienced. And for perhaps the first time in decades, insiders suggest the institution is finally beginning to adapt. Because while public fascination with royalty remains enormous, the monarchy increasingly understands that fascination alone cannot sustain the crown if the people born into it are consumed by the pressure surrounding them. Edward and Sophie's room. Mayang influence reportedly symbolizes a broader institutional awakening, one rooted not in spectacle, but in preservation, discipline, and emotional survival. And as the cameras continue flashing beyond palace gates, one reality now seems impossible to ignore. The royal family may finally be learning that preserving the crown sometimes means protecting the children destined to inherit it. What truly transformed the palace strategy from quiet adjustment into national conversation was not an official announcement but the reaction of the public itself. Across Britain and beyond, millions began debating whether royal children deserved greater protection or whether reduced appearances threatened the monarchy's connection to ordinary life. At first, the shift surrounding George, Charlotte, and Louis unfolded almost invisibly, buried beneath routine palace schedules and carefully worded royal updates. But once the public began noticing fewer spontaneous appearances, tighter family moments, and increasingly controlled interactions involving the Wales children, the conversation exploded far beyond royal circles. Suddenly, what had once been a quiet institutional adjustment became a deeply emotional, ional national debate touching on parenting, privacy, tradition, and even the future relevance of the monarchy itself. And perhaps most striking of all was how divided public opinion quickly became. Supporters of Edward and Sophie's strategy argued the monarchy had finally begun acknowledging a reality ordinary families already understood, that children should not be forced to live beneath constant public pressure simply because of the circumstances of their birth. Across social media platforms, thousands of parents reportedly expressed sympathy toward William and Catherine, describing the emotional difficulty of raising children under non-stop scrutiny as almost unimaginable. For many observers, the conversation stopped being about royalty altogether and became something far more human. They saw George, Charlotte, and Louis not as symbols or future constitutional figures, but as children navigating extraordinary expectations before fully understanding what those expectations mean. At the same time, critics pushed back forcefully against the palace's evolving approach. Some royal traditionalists argued the monarchy survives precisely because it remains emotionally accessible to the public. They warned that limiting appearances too aggressively could weaken the bond between the crown and ordinary people whose loyalty ultimately sustains the institution. According to several royal commentators, concerns began spreading that the younger generation of royals risked becoming distant, overprotected, and disconnected from public life if visibility continued shrinking. That argument gained traction among those who believe royal life has always required sacrifice, including the sacrifice of personal privacy in service to national duty. But the rise of social media intensified every side of the debate in ways previous royal generations never experienced. Every public appearance involving Charlotte or George instantly generated millions of comments, endless analysis, and overwhelming global attention. What once might have faded after a newspaper cycle now continued indefinitely across digital platforms where scrutiny never truly disappears. Royal experts increasingly pointed out that modern royal children face something fundamentally different from earlier generations, not simply media attention, but permanent visibility. And according to insiders, that realization later shaped the thinking of William, Catherine, Edward, and Sophie behind palace walls. Younger audiences in particular appeared far more supportive of stronger protective boundaries surrounding royal children. Many viewed constant public exposure as outdated, even harmful, especially in a culture increasingly aware of mental health pressures affecting young people. Reports suggest shifting attitudes toward child fame and online exploitation also played a major role in changing public perception. Unlike previous decades where visibility was often treated as glamorous or beneficial, growing numbers of people now question the emotional cost of growing up permanently observed. And within that conversation, sympathy toward Princess Charlotte and Prince George reportedly deepened significantly. Charlotte's rising popularity especially became a focal point of public concern. Admirers praised her confidence and composure, yet others worried about the enormous pressure attached to becoming one of the most recognized children in the world before reaching adolescence. George faced similar scrutiny, though shaped by the immense weight of future kingship already hanging over him. Increasing. And lastly, public conversations reflected a sobering awareness that royal childhood may carry emotional burdens few people fully comprehend from the outside. Behind the scenes, palace insiders reportedly monitored these reactions closely. Public sentiment matters deeply to the monarchy, and according to royal commentators, officials understood the debate surrounding royal children reflected something larger than simple curiosity. It revealed a society wrestling with changing expectations about privacy, duty, fame, and emotional well-being in the digital age. And while the public continued arguing over appearances and accessibility, insiders claim the monarchy itself had already moved into a far more serious phase of discussion. Yet inside Windsor, the conversation had already moved beyond public opinion because the monarchy's senior figures were now thinking about legacy, survival, and the future shape of the crown itself. In the end, this was never simply about fewer photographs, shorter appearances, or carefully controlled family moments. According to those who study the monarchy closely, Prince Edward and Sophie's coordinated approach represents something much larger, a quiet but profound redefinition of how the House of Windsor prepares its youngest heirs for a lifetime inside one of the world's most unforgiving institutions. For centuries, the monarchy survived by adapting just enough to protect itself without ever appearing to change too dramatically. That delicate balancing act carried the crown through wars, scandals, abdications, political upheaval, and generational shifts that might have destroyed weaker institutions. But insiders now suggest the royal family may be confronting a challenge unlike anything it has faced before, not a constitutional crisis, but a psychological one. Because the modern media era does not simply observe royal life anymore, it consumes it. Every childhood moment becomes content, every emotion becomes debate, every mistake becomes permanent. And according to palace commentators, Edward and Sophie recognized earlier than most that survival in this environment would require something the monarchy historically resisted: emotional protection placed at the very center of institutional strategy. That shift appears to be quietly transforming the royal family from within. Sources close to palace operations claim visibility is no longer being treated as an endless obligation but as something increasingly controlled, measured, and carefully rationed. The emphasis now, according to insiders, is not simply on preserving popularity, but on preserving people. George, Charlotte, and Louis are reportedly being raised with a level of emotional caution designed to prepare they for royal life without allowing royal life to completely consume them before adulthood. And while critics continue debating whether such protections distance the monarchy from the public, supporters argue the institution has finally learned painful lessons from its own history. Those lessons, according to royal experts, were written through decades of suffering hidden beneath royal ceremony. Diana's overwhelming public exposure, William's childhood beneath relentless scrutiny, Harry's growing resentment toward palace structures he believed failed to protect him emotionally. Each crisis reportedly forced the monarchy to confront uncomfortable truths about the cost of visibility when left unchecked. And insiders claim Edward and Sophie's influence expanded precisely because they approached those lessons not emotionally, but strategically. Rather than view I&G royal children as symbols first and individuals second, they allegedly pushed palace thinking toward a far more sustainable model focused on long-term stability instead of short-term spectacle. William and Catherine now appear increasingly central to that transformation. Royal commentators often describe the Wales family as the blueprint for what a modern monarchy may eventually become: still formal, still disciplined, still deeply tied to duty, but more aware of emotional well-being than previous generations ever allowed themselves to be. That approach reportedly reflects a growing belief inside palace walls that future kings and queens cannot simply survive through tradition alone. They must survive emotionally too. And according to insiders, that realization may become one of the defining institutional shifts of Charles's reign. At the heart of this strategy are George, Charlotte, and Louis themselves, not merely as beloved royal children, but as carefully protected future assets whose stability now carries enormous constitutional importance. Palace aides reportedly understand that the monarchy's long-term survival depends heavily on whether the next generation can endure the necessary emerged pressures waiting ahead without fracturing beneath them. That is why discussions surrounding discipline, structure, emotional resilience, and psychological well-being have allegedly become far more significant within royal planning than the public fully realizes. The institution is no longer preparing children only for ceremony and duty. It is preparing them for survival inside a radically different world, and perhaps that is the clearest sign of all that the monarchy is adapting to a new era, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, carefully, and with growing urgency behind palace walls. Because while royal traditions remain ancient, the forces surrounding the crown have changed completely. Social media scrutiny, non-stop public commentary, and the collapse of private space have created pressures previous generations never faced. And now, according to those watching the institution closely, the monarchy finally understands that preserving the crown may require protecting its future heirs from the very machinery that once helped sustain royal mystique in the first place. Because beneath the ceremonies, titles, and palace walls lies the monarchy's oldest lesson of all. The future, the crown depends not only on duty but on protecting those born to carry it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.